Oh, we're live. Excellent. Welcome, everyone, and welcome to the API Chronicles Unlocking the Future, a live celebration of APIs hosted by Marqeta. Today, we're exploring how APIs and modern platforms are empowering innovators to move away from traditional stores of value and fiat currency. And basically, we will be talking about the future of money. So, we'll discuss how this looks now, what options are readily available, and what is being developed, and indeed what this means for all of us as the future of money evolves. I'm Liz Lovely of The Banker, and we have a wonderful panel here today. We've got the very famous Dave Birch, Cameron Perry from Tally Money, and Christian Sorensen from the Tokenizer. So we're going to have a really great discussion. I think it's going to be very easy for me. I'm just going to have to sit back and let all of them make their comments. As always, I mentioned before, we are live. So if you would like to put a question, type in a question into the however you're watching us today, and we will see if we can read them out during the panel discussion. A bit of advice: you're more likely to get your question read out if it is short, concise, and more importantly, a question. So we will get forward with our questions looking at the future of money. And it's very interesting. I feel like I've been seeing panels on the future of money my entire career. It's kind of like what lazy event producers do to kind of talk about the evolution of the financial services industry. But I really wanted to get into a deep dive into what this means exactly when people talk about the future of money. How does that future differ from the expert on stage who talks about some utopia, and then the person really kind of living a life on the streets outside of our fintech bubble, your plumber, your child's teacher? What does the future of money look like for them? So I'd really like you to set the stage for us now. So Dave, I'm gonna start with you.
Sure. Well, I think, and I agree with your point about, endless tedious panels about the same topic that never really address it. But actually, we're breaking out of that a bit now, because in the past, you were supposed to talk about the future of money, but what people actually talked about was the future of payment systems, which for people like me is a really interesting topic, and I care a lot about NFC versus QR codes and so on. But it's not the future of money. The future of money is about the value that's being transferred between owners. And I think here, this is why we've seen such a change in this, because in the past, if you were trying to talk about this in the sense of what will we be transferring that's valuable, we could only really think about the things that we had. But there was a great breakthrough, and it's fair to call it that, with the arrival of things like Bitcoin. I think, by the way, a lot of the Bitcoin people don't realize that Bitcoin didn't leap into existence fully formed. It has a heritage of technology. But the point is, there was a flowering there, which has meant people begin to think about this in different ways. And so we've gone from, how can we basically send pounds and dollars quicker, cheaper, more efficiently from place to place, to what does it mean when Jay Gold, when he was the chairman of the SEC, says everything's going to be tokenized? What does it mean when we start to see corporate strategies which mean that different kinds of value can be transferred from one place to another? And I'll give you one example just to get the discussion going, because of something I was involved in yesterday. But historically, if we always had to use the intermediary of money to exchange value, because we couldn't exchange the value itself. So if I had a share in Apple and I want to trade that to Liz for some reason, that involves, a market maker, a broker dealer, a front office, a back office, delivery versus payment, clearing, settlement, blah, 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 all sorts of other. So we wouldn't do it. That wouldn't be, I would never pay Liz with a share of Apple for something. But if I send Liz an Apple token, it goes from my wallet to her wallet, and that's the end of the story. And the reason why so many what you would regard as like serious finance people, the people that read Liz, are interested in this stuff is not because of some ideological nonsense about, smash the state, we don't need toe intermediaries and all this sort of thing. The reason why Liz's readers care about this stuff is because they want to trade without clearing and settlement. They see a vastly cheaper, more efficient financial infrastructure around the corner, which means a great explosion in the nature of liquid assets and how they can be traded. So it's fun talking about pictures of chimpanzees with sunglasses on and Bitcoin and all this sort of thing. But what this really is about is a faster, cheaper financial infrastructure. And that's why the serious people are talking about the future of money now.
Well, actually, I was going to say, I'm going to steal the flowering of money that you mentioned earlier. I'm gonna steal that for an upcoming conference. But I wanted to move on to Kristen, because you talked a lot about tokenization, and you're from the tokenizer. I mean, how, like, what are we talking about when we're looking at the future of money?
I mean, I think Dave touched upon most of the important topics, and concluding that this is an evolution towards cheaper and faster. And if there's one thing all history of digitization has taught us, so that is, if you can do something cheaper and faster by digitizing it, that will eventually happen. So this development around tokenization is moving from a crypto enthusiast or ideological state to, okay, what can we actually do with these technologies? How can we actually use this to improve the financial services industry as we know it, and even improve our idea of value exchange, as Dave also mentioned, fundamentally, because people have been trading everything throughout the history of mankind, and money was originally invented to make that trade cheaper. But we've spent the past decades innovating on top of that intermediary or that interface, or, I mean, money in itself is almost a token representing something else. So instead of keep innovating on top of that, I think we are now at a place where we can start innovating on a more fundamental level. And I think that is where we see a major change in financial services now.
I'm going to go to Cameron. I mean, I know we have a question for the audience, but it kind of relates to something that we're going to talk about a little bit later in the discussion. So I'm going to hold that audience question for now, but I wanted to really get everyone an opening statement on their views on the future of money. So Cameron, I wanted to go to you.
Yeah, I think the money itself, and as the guys were saying, payments becoming more convenient, and that's kind of a natural thing. But I think what we really need to take a cold hard look at is the underlying substance of the underlying thing that we're using, or the base thing that we all come back to with our payments and with the exchange of value. And if we talk about the future of money, I mean, the first question is, what's wrong with the money we've got now? Like, why are we trying to fix anything? What's wrong with that system that needs to be addressed? It's always an important question around innovation, but who are you doing the innovating for? Who ultimately is the one that benefits? And obviously, there's it's very convenient for consumers, but is it far more important to have a look at what is deriving the value of their money and their legal claim and title to it? And the substance of the thing that holds this value that's used very quickly as a medium of exchange, that really, to me, is what fundamentally needs to be looked at. And that's certainly where we were coming at it from Tally Money's point of view. I think money, it should be designed to serve the people, not large financial institutions. And I think that's a great place to start, because ultimately we're trying to come up with innovations, all of us, even payments, the quality of money that people choose to use, but it's for the end consumer, which is the general public. And I think that's really where we need to focus on for all these discussions.
I'm going to stay with you because it's interesting, because both Dave and Christian talked a little bit about the infrastructure around money, and you're getting more into is money actually something that needs to be fixed? Is it broken? If you meet someone on the street and you think, well, cash works perfectly fine, or this looks, is money in itself broken and doesn't need to be fixed?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I started developing Tally was because, I mean, myself and others realised that the fiat currency fractional reserve banking system is broken. The public sector, state-run government issued money supply was no longer serving the public. And, I suppose as an entrepreneur, I was very focused on creating and building a solution to that. It's not a solution that everybody will want, but building a mainstream alternative to pounds or euros or, dollars in the banking world that they already knew how to use. They could use it in a familiar environment. They understood what it was and just get on with their daily lives and build up their savings for their own wealth and for the wealth of their family and for whatever their financial plans required. The current system we have, which has been going for 50 years now, isn't anchored to anything. It's a debt-based money. In the UK, only 3.5% of it is ever printed or minted as far as our M1 money supply goes, let alone our broad money supply. So that means 96% of it already is digitally created and digitally stored. The value transfer happens through an encrypted message. So, digital money with encryption, there's a word for that, it's cryptocurrency. Maybe some of the Ponzi scheme models that some of these cryptos have, maybe they're borrowing it from somebody who's done it before and, so in another system. So, money should be pretty simple. I mean, I definitely agree. Payments should be very convenient, straightforward, immediate. They should be low cost. It shouldn't matter whether you're standing next to the person or standing on a different continent. With technology nowadays, with deregulation, particularly in places like the UK, I mean, London's a fintech capital of the world for a reason. And so definitely we want to have, there should be a lot of innovation coming from us here. But people in their daily lives, they just want something that's sound, that they can rely on, that is a store of value, that is a good medium of exchange and an understandable unit of account. And sadly, I don't think we have that with fiat currency, and it's really becoming apparent in the last couple of decades, and particularly since the global financial crisis, I think, was a big sort of flag for a lot of people. Even now in headline figures where you see inflation at 10%, people are like, do you mean I'm losing 10% of my purchasing power a year, like almost 1% a month? That affects me, that hurts me. I'm trying to get ahead. I'm trying to look for a pay rise. My cost of living is going up here. I think this whole, I think it's going to come to some sort of a transition would be the lightest way, but where people are more and more, and certainly we're finding this at Tally, are looking at the substance of the money itself. And second to that, they want it to be convenient, they want payments to work, they want it to be secure, they want to be reliable and all that. But that's really where we're finding a lot of people are now starting to look, what is this thing that I'm using? What else is available, if anything? And that is because people kind of just want a simple thing, something reliable. They feel more secure the more of it they have, rather than less certain. It's an unusual thing when you strive to earn, be more productive and earn more money, and that they can use anywhere, as freely as the other guys were suggesting.
So you talked a lot, and I'm going through what you said, but I'd love to hear Dave's views on that. I mean, is that overcomplicating what money is? What don't we understand?
I think first of all, I do. People keep calling these things Ponzi schemes, the cryptocurrency things, which is I think is a little unfair because Charles Ponzi's investors got back about 30 cents on the dollar. I mean, these people are going to get nothing. So it's a little bit. So I don't know if you can compare the two things. But look, I think there's two quite distinct issues here. So you say what's wrong with the current system? And certainly, you can argue that that it's inflationary and blah blah blah. I'm not sure. To me, I don't think that's a strong enough argument to replace it because this kind of wistful, I think, misplaced nostalgia for the days of a sort of gold standard. I think that's disconnected from the modern world. I don't think that's really. But the point about having more different kinds of money, I think that's quite an interesting point. And this idea about the need to use money as an intermediary in transactions, the idea that, the ability to, I mean, I'm not just saying this because Christian's here, but the ability to tokenize everything actually reduces the need to use sort of currencies of any kind as intermediaries, because you'd end up in a situation where wallets that let's use that example again, right? So I'm going to pay Liz to come and chair a conference for me or something. So so she asks for 10,000 Scottish groats or whatever it is that makes sense to her, and I offer them some Tesla shares and 2 square inches of the Mona Lisa, and eventually we can. Now that sounds mad, but actually it wouldn't be Liz and I having that discussion. It would be Liz and I's smart wallets having that discussion. And frankly, I don't really want to be involved in that discussion. And so if a cheaper and quicker way to get things done is to move around these tokenized assets rather than selling the assets for different kinds of money and then messing around with the money, I think we'll head in that direction. I think there's also a point to make about different, for example, there was a story in the Financial Times, I can't remember, it was a couple of days ago, I don't remember when, about Brazil and Argentina talking about having a sort of
I saw that.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if you're old enough to remember the days of the ECU, the European Currency Unit, but there was a discussion at the time then about instead of having currency union, would an alternative idea to be what was in those days called a hard ECU, in other words, a trade currency that we'd all use for international trade, but would never exist as a physical thing. So you're talking about when you're talking about what I spend in Waitrose, and when you're talking about what companies use for cross-border trades, and when you talk about what people use for savings, and when you talk about what people use as a mechanism for long-term deferred payment, these are all very different things. We've been through an era where those things all got rolled up together. But if you go, I'll give you an example. In the US, I think, is a very interesting example of this. In the American colonies, as I still think of them, in the American colonies, and remember, Liz, I'm quite serious about this, but when Meghan Markle's daughter becomes Queen of England and President of the United States, the long-awaited, reunion is inevitable. But there you would have a situation where people would write contracts with each other. I'm going to rent some land from you, and I'm going to pay you £1 in gold every year or whatever it is for this sort of thing, despite the fact there was no gold or silver because Britain wouldn't export any. None of the colonists had ever seen a pound. So these things were all different. The pound and the gold, and of course these transactions were always commuted into local currencies, wampun and so on. So we lived in a world where these things were all different. We've just been through a period where they're all the same, but that's not a law of physics. That's a sort of set of institutional arrangements. So I think this idea that the ability to start moving, the ability to tokenize, the ability to start trading all of these different kinds of liquid assets means that different groups of assets, different kinds of assets will get used for different things, seems to me quite logical. Where that leaves the fiat currencies of today, that's an interesting question. Because, for example, and I'll pose it as a question to the guys, imagine that there were some kind of smart wallet that everybody in the world could use on their mobile phone, and your smart wallet could store any kind of token for any kind of transaction. I would predict that tomorrow, 99% of what most people in the world would store in their wallet most of the time would be US dollars. I mean, it wouldn't be Dogecoin or.
There was, because I had a follow-up. I had a follow-up question on what you were talking about, and maybe someone else in the panel wants to discuss this. This discussion around having all these different types of payments. You mentioned the United States. The fact that the United States is such a large country with a single currency isn't the idea of simplifying? Why is this idea of having this incredibly fragmented, disparate group of payment types the future we're heading towards? Shouldn't it? Don't you think that naturally customer behavior would, exactly as Dave said, if everyone had a digital wallet that could accept anything, it would probably be 90% US dollar or some other safe currency.
I'd like to take a stab at that because I think most of what we've talked about is sort of the transactional side of money. But we have to remember that money also plays a large role in storage of value. And I think that is probably where some of these tokenized scenarios will play out first, because we still use the monetary value of our pension savings as the indicator of how big is your pension saving. But in fact, most of us, our pension savings is typically a mixture of stocks and bonds, which is still only a fraction of what I could potentially and should potentially invest in to save for my pension. Because why not? I mean, why not have some certain kilowatts of electricity in my pension savings? Because I probably know that I will need heat and light when I grow old. I would love to have a tokenized wine collection, and I do have the wine already, but also maybe access to a tokenized wine collection. I mean, talk about liquid assets. Anyways, that you could basically invest in anything, and we see some. I mean, BNY Mellon, they recently did a survey amongst the institutional investors, the guys that manages our portfolios, and 91%. 91% is not just 60%. It's 91% said that they were quite interested in exploring tokenized investment opportunities. So I think it goes to show that we are moving towards the ability to invest in everything. And I think that is also where the wallet discussion branches out from just a means of payment, but also a storage of value. Because in my wallet, I may have some woodlands in Lithuania, a bit of a gold mine in South Africa, and a bit of a building in Manhattan. So the idea of the wallet beyond a payments wallet, I think, is important part of this discussion.
I wanted to move. I mean, I think the idea that you should be able to invest in anything is another panel discussion. I might put that in my pocket, but I wanted to move on to talk about digital money. And there was a question from the audience that said, shouldn't tokens or any digital unit need to be backed by a national bank? And if you look at sort of digital and e-money, and there's a lot of movement towards central bank digital currencies, is this just looking at making fiat currency digital? I mean, or is there a better way to look at that? Cameron, I was wondering when your views
yeah,
on
I just wanted to comment on the last thing, particularly Dave was saying about having lots of different financialized instruments in a smart wallet, and then that makes a decision of how many of these shares it takes out, how many to walk in a Waitrose and pay for something. And people they don't necessarily want to just park their brain and let somebody else manage the investment portfolio that they're building up. But they also, and for any other, you'd call them exotics as far as investments goes, but any exotic investment, you need liquidity, otherwise it just doesn't work. So I do agree that people want to come back to simplicity, and money itself should be quite a simple thing. It's only really meant to have three elements to it. The question is, does fiat currency cover those elements, and then does anything else? I don't see.
So if fiat currency doesn't cover those elements, making it digital wouldn't solve anything then?
It's already digital. It's already created by a keystroke. There's nothing behind it. There's no anchor of accountability to anything that's either tangible or anything to do with a measurement of output or productivity like GDP, the size of the economy. It's completely digital. Every unit of currency out there in fiat is debt-based. So there's a debit and a credit to it.
But the thing is, Brendan, I think there's, or at least in my head, there's a really strong distinction between electronic money, which is what you're talking about. And you're absolutely right. I can't remember the figures for the UK, but essentially, 97% of money is just completely made up on spreadsheets in banks somewhere and doesn't actually exist. Electronic money lives in bank accounts, and the world of payments is about moving that money between bank accounts. I think what we're talking about here is electronic cash, which doesn't live in bank accounts. It lives in my phone and my car and my drawer and my pot. I mean, obviously it's got to be on a device of some kind, but much as the cash I have at home lives in a drawer and by the front door, it doesn't live in my bank account. So the electronic money that's in bank accounts, I think, let's ignore that for the purposes of this part of the conversation and just talk about the electronic cash. And I think there is a really radical difference, which is, again, if I use faster payments to send Liz £1,000, it goes through my bank and confirmation of payee and deferred net settlement, and then, you know, Bank of England RTGS and blah blah blah. If I send Liz £1,000 from my phone to her car, end of. It just goes across the internet from one place to another, and it's that, you know, that causes this radical change. And that's why I think, I mean, I can't prove it with a pie chart or a spreadsheet or anything, but I think that's where the innovation will come. And if just to preempt the question, which is, you know, well, why would the Bank of England bother doing something like this in these circumstances? I think, you know, many commentators have pointed out that it's really an innovation play. You know, it isn't because there's a problem going around to Waitrose at the moment. You know, my debit card works fine. It's like this electronic cash, but the idea that you would have £10 notes with an API that people could build cool permissionless stuff on and do interesting things with, that really is quite interesting. And those I mean, I don't know necessarily what those innovations will be. I could make some guesses around micropayments and so on and so forth, but the point is, you know, this idea of the digital currency as a platform for innovation, to me, makes more sense than digital currency as a, you know, a fix for some payments problem. You know, there's lots of other ways of fixing payments problems. But yeah, so my point is that, you know, in my head, those two things are quite, you're absolutely right, but they're quite different, I think.
I love how whenever Dave speaks, he's talking about sending me money. Which, my
I know how to get invited back. That's
my digital wallet accepts dollars, pounds, and euros.
Yeah.
But we have a question from the audience that I know a few of you have viewpoints on, which is, how do you bridge privacy rights in a digital currency world? Does anyone want to go for that one?
Actually, if I could just answer that last question, because I don't think we did it justice.
Doing it again.
And whatever his name was. But yeah, it doesn't need to be a state only a state-backed form of money. The state provides a certain type of money that suits, you know, a country for the, you know, if you like, the agenda or outcome that the issuer has by a central bank and by, you know, government. It really is up to the private sector to naturally get in and offer competition. You know, money is just a product. Like in England, our product provider is the Bank of England, and the product they have is a pound. And if you understand it that way, then of course the private sector should come in and offer different kinds of products that people can gravitate towards and use if they choose to. You know, we shouldn't just be trapped in a monopoly. And I think that's where the innovation comes from. And it definitely, I don't see the innovation actually coming from the state civil service. It doesn't come from regulators. They're kind of backward looking, you know, by nature of what they do. It really has to come from the private sector, from the innovators and the entrepreneurs that are out there. And it definitely does not have to only come from a state, a national sort of currency. I'm not saying we shouldn't have one. I'm just saying it's not the only one that, you know, we shouldn't be caught in a monopoly of it.
Just a quick follow up on that, because I think that's quite interesting to look at what the national banks are doing, because I'm not sure I'm correct, but I think that I see sort of a tendency to apply what we have seen with open banking, that the traditional financial services sector, the banks, they have embraced third-party innovation, but leveraging their own infrastructure through open banking. Are these attempts at CBDCs pretty much a similar approach? So an API layer on top of a state-issued currency, and then allow third parties to innovate on top of that. Is that where we are heading?
Yeah, I kind of think so, and I actually think that's quite an attractive model, to be honest, Christian. So this idea that people will be able to build, you know, new products and services on top of CBDC, I think is really quite attractive. And remember, in a lot of circumstances, because the money is just going from me to you without any kind of, you know, those will be cheaper services, and so people will move to use those. But to the broader question of what kinds of tokens would be used alongside that. So let's say we have tokens which are sort of digital pounds, but we have loads of other tokens to choose from as well. I rather do agree with the point that they have to be tied to something. I mean, maybe it's just because I'm old, or I don't know. But the idea of cryptocurrency, which has a value which is just purely based on supply and demand in what I have to say are thin, opaque, and transparently manipulated markets is not particularly appealing. The idea of look, if I say this token is worth X, Dave coin is worth, well, you quite rightly, deride that. But if Citibank says, well, this token is an ounce of gold, a square foot of this office building, whatever, that's pretty good. And so I think on the whole, I would prefer tokens that have an institutional framework that sits behind them, and the liquidity I would have thought would go in that direction. But there are a whole bunch of people who prefer, I guess, the kind of fun and excitement of speculating on, completely imaginary currencies.
But I wanted to go back to a little bit because I want to get into crypto and alternative to fiat in a second. But I just wanted to get back to what you were talking about of building this API layer on top of the currency. So if you have a pound or a dollar, which the Bank of England says is worth a pound, there's like a trust in that. And you have third parties building something on top. Who's the trust that, like, who's in control of what's a derivative of the original pound or 10 pounds?
Well, again, you want to get the shortest distance between A and B. So, Dave, where you want to send something from your smartphone wallet to his smartphone wallet, which we're all waiting to see happen, according to Liz. But if you want to send value directly like that, why would you not just directly own the thing? And this is, you don't need Citibank to be there, and you see a trusted institution. I mean, the whole banking model is a lending model that works against the person who earned the money, because you don't even own the money anymore. That's why they pay you interest, because they lend it from you and then do all sorts of risky things with it. But you don't need that. I mean, regardless of whether you think that's a good idea or not, you just don't need it. If you can have direct ownership of an asset, whatever that asset is, and if it's an asset that you, accept or is easily understood the value of, so Liz is happy to kind of receive that, you don't need anybody else in between that. So it's not just the payment, it's the legal right to the thing of value that you're then transferring. And it can be really simple.
No, I don't think that's quite sort of meant by that. So what I meant was, if I create a token, and this token, let's use the example Christian used, I want to create a token that's going to be a kilowatt hour, and I want to be able to exchange that kilowatt hour in 20, 30 years time. Then relying on a legal structure which says basically it's Dave's good word, which says this is a kilowatt hour, I don't think that's going to compete with a system under which some institution says this is going to be worth a kilowatt hour, and it has regulations and institutions and so on. So
that's a different example altogether, because what you're relying on there is whether that person, that entity or organization can produce that kilowatt hour that you're saying has a value in today's terms that you can use in 30 years from now. And there's a massive amount of time to go, companies, will it be around in 30 years? I mean, that's the main short that idea. So what you're referring to as Citibank is that they somehow would need to be an institution for something like gold. It's just not the case. All you need is a trusted custodial arrangement, then with technology that allows you to do exactly what you described, which is what we built at Tally.
Yeah, I agree with that point about trusted custodial arrangements, actually. So I'm certainly not a fan of the idea that, everyone's going to sort of, remember this kind of, the Bitcoin people used to say, you want to be your own bank. Although no sane person would want to be their own bank. I mean, this idea of
bank wants to be
of course. But the idea of trusted custodial arrangement, I think, is really quite interesting, because that clearly is a potential growth business. Because if people are going to own and trade these tokens, I mean, I couldn't find my car keys an hour ago. I mean, the idea that I would want the keys to my pension in my desk drawer somewhere, or buried in a biscuit tin in my back garden, or wrapped in tinfoil under my hat or something, ridiculous. But this kind of trusted custodianship of these tokens, that's a growth business. There's no doubt about that in my mind.
Yeah, and it's just
we still didn't answer the question about privacy.
Yeah.
Do you want to move on to privacy right now? Or?
I can think a lot more about that, but yeah, definitely.
But what do you think?
Oh, sorry. You want me to speak about privacy? Well,
Yeah,
basically, if you've got all your eggs in one basket, if you're with one institution, then there are rules and guidelines around protecting privacy. But it is true that you have a digital trail all with one institution or all in one system. And I think some people are a bit worried about the central bank digital currencies. It'll be the government that can watch all your transactions. There won't even be the layer of the banks at that point. So you just need to protect your own privacy, just to be able to operate in multiple monetary systems. That's why I think that's the future of money, is having more. Not many. There'll just be a number of winners, even though there'll be a lot of triers. There'll just be a few that kind of make it, and I think simplicity is key. But where you can access one monetary system with the money you choose to own. There's some pros and cons of that monetary system. You can have a bit in both. You could have two or three. I don't think most people really want more than two or three choices that they can really rely on.
That's true. Actually, some people, e.g. me, for example, don't want any choices because I want bots to do all this for me. The level of financial literacy in this country is so catastrophically low. It will be like, in the future, you won't actually be allowed to drive your car because cars drive themselves more safely. There'll be like, you won't be allowed to drive your own car into London. There should be the same thing for pensions and things. I mean, like allowing people to kind of manage this stuff themselves is probably a sort of dereliction of national duty. We shouldn't be doing that sort of stuff, but that's a different point. But back to the privacy point, I think, and I'm challenging Christian around this to see his views on this, because he's Scandinavian, they don't have any privacy. They all read each other's tax returns. They don't care about this stuff. They all have ID cards, but I think privacy will be one of the competitive advantages of currency systems in this new place. Anonymity will be a massive disadvantage, because for somebody like me, if I am going to send Liz some money, I'm not going to send it using some untraceable, anonymous, private, because then she'll just say, well, I never got the money. And I'll say, what? I sent it to you. Well, prove it. Well, you can't because it's anonymous. Well, that doesn't make any sense. They'll be like, well, Liz, I left the cash for you under the tree around the corner from Safe. And she's like, well, I never got it. Like, are you sure you got it? Anonymity doesn't make any sense for these kind of things. But privacy, I think, will be an advantage. So I can well imagine a situation where people will, I'll use an example. So I might decide to use Australian dollars or Canadian dollars, for example, because they're pretty much just as stable as US dollars, but they're more private. They have certain privacy protections, certain legal protections around them. Maybe US dollars don't, or digital yuan don't. So I think the stars are aligning here to make, and also remember the technologies around privacy. Some of the stuff that we're doing, and actually we did talk about this in the Marqeta strategy document before. Some of the technologies in that space, and you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about zero knowledge proofs, verifiable credentials, homomorphic encryption. These technologies are developing beautifully. So the ability to conduct private transactions in ways where all the participants feel like trust in the transaction, I think that's looking good. I'm actually rather optimistic about that. So personally, I'm quite optimistic about the privacy side of things.
Are you challenging Christian to make a comment on that?
Well, I'm happy to make the comment, although I actually pretty much agree with Dave here. And I think just as money are evolving, so is ID and digital ID. And yes, here in the Nordics, we were among the first to build national IDs, and they were pretty centralized. But now we, in the Nordics, as the rest of Europe, are moving towards more federal and self-governed ID and e-ID wallets and so on and so forth. And I think that development will enable much better privacy control or at least transparency of data sharing. So I think privacy is a very important feature of payments. And as Dave says, it will be a competitive feature as well. But I fully agree that anonymity is probably not what we could or should be hoping for.
I think for our, and remember, I mean, our clients aren't, absolute cross set. I mean, our clients tend to be the sort of bigger players in this sort of space, but I think these things are all being driven. You've got people beginning to think actually decentralized finance may not be crazy. Cryptocurrency might be, but etc. Maybe central bank digital currency, tokenization, these ways forward. But the sort of privacy, I think, actually is part of the kind of overall bundle with these kind of things, because in financial markets, you have this odd tension because you need privacy in the transactions, but you also need certain kinds of transparency because you want to make sure no one's cheating and people are obeying the rules and that sort of thing. And I think, it's too dreary to go into it all now, but I think there's something interesting in that wallets and smart contracts and tokens and verifiable credentials and which somehow I think gives us the building blocks of a rather different financial system, which is better for everybody. The intermediation costs of the financial system, which should have been going down in the face of new technology, have actually continued to go up. And the idea that we could use these building blocks to build a different kind of financial infrastructure, which well, not just cheaper, but better in lots of ways, that doesn't seem so far-fetched to me anymore. I think that's realistic. But
is that, maybe I'll go to Christian for this, but in terms of what you're describing, that different financial structure, does that still include fiat currencies, or where I'm not anti-crypto, but crypto as kind of this replacing fiat, I've always
no, and I think it's my good colleague Michael. He made the nice analogy of the early days of crypto. It was like the avant-garde movement in the art world. It was out with the old, in with the new. It was the idea of replacing. So was the first wave of fintech. It was the idea of let's replace the everything we know and build everything from scratch. But this pendulum movement and is probably going a bit back and forth. So where it was the monopoly of the states to issue currencies, now with crypto, Dave could issue his Dave coin, I could issue my coin, which probably wasn't the best idea. So let's find the middle ground here and find these commonalities where we take the best of both worlds. Because I think we need to differentiate between who issues the money and who backs the money, because money can be issued by different parties and backed by different things. And I think that was also what Brendan alluded to, that there are different models there, and I think that will be explored. So to your question, no, I don't think fiat currencies will be redundant anytime soon. But in order to stay relevant and competitive, it needs to evolve. And I think that is what we see with the CBDC projects around the world. We have to remember also that the states in many countries are the largest employer. They're the ones who dictate how you pay your taxes. And right now you have to pay your taxes in fiat currency. They pay their salary in fiat currency. So they can pretty much dictate that fiat currencies will stay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, and I think you're right, though, that cryptos aren't the answer, and fiat currencies shouldn't be the only thing, because they do have some very big failings and shortcomings for the public. The fact that you have to pay your taxes in a particular form, that's fine. I could have to pay them in US dollars. The moment before I have to pay them, I could just pay them in US dollars. So I don't think that's such a hold, but nevertheless, I don't think governments should give away issuing a currency. I do think they should be competed with, because their product's really failing the public. So something like gold, for example, is a known, universally understood store of value, and it's proven to be so over time. It doesn't go up in a straight line against fiat currencies. It moves around, but it goes up over time. But it's a poor medium of exchange and a poor unit of account for most people. So fiat currencies are a great medium of exchange, just talking about pounds, for example, and it's a great unit of account. I really understand what I'm getting when my Starbucks, coffee goes from £3.20 to £3.30. It's very easy for me to understand this. I don't think cryptos tick any of those boxes, and I'm actually a big fan in principle of Bitcoin. Most other cryptocurrencies are a Ponzi scheme. They're built on nothing. At least Bitcoin, one could argue, has value through its protocol and scale, and actually by what it's achieved is pretty phenomenal too. But I don't think that's the right answer yet for mass adoption to give choice to consumers. And again, we need to get competition into the forms of money we can hold in a bank account, because we know how to use bank accounts and debit cards, and with our wonderful card processor there at Marqeta. So that's what I designed Tally around. It's kind of got the best of both worlds. You know, every unit of Tally is a milligram of gold that we vault on behalf of the customer. It's never on our balance sheet. You don't have that counterparty risk. It's your legal title and control to that asset. And then we put it in a form, and with our technology platform, give it utility as money that seamlessly operates with other bank accounts and other merchant, facilities and ATMs and all this type of thing. So it's designed to operate like a mainstream foreign currency, except that you're in a currency with entirely different characteristics and entirely different protections and things that benefit you rather than the financial institution. So I think these things can be done. It is a new category of money, but I think there's more to come on that. It doesn't necessarily have to be crypto. CBDs are something different. I can't see governments not going that way, but they already print digital money. It is already digital. This will give them some more controls over it and actually be able to reconcile it better. And there are good arguments to why CBDCs can improve things, but it does come with some potential threats, and this is around like the person who asked about your data and who could see it, and would a civil servant be looking at it, and could they switch off your access to your money? Could they block your account temporarily? Could they program the money to restrict the time before it expires if the government needed to get the economy going and get all of our spending up? Things like this. I mean, this technology's, blockchain's a pretty big breakthrough. You can do these things. Nobody's saying they would.
A bank can do that now, though. They can freeze. A bank can do that now.
You mean what's that, Liz? Have your money time out on you or restrict what you can spend it on?
Yeah, if they suspect fraud, they'll close your account. If you're a former Chancellor of the Exchequer of the UK, maybe HMRC will look at your taxes.
They're not right. Discriminate you on a PEP sanction way.
Cameron's point is a macroeconomic point, which is, it does restrict the ability. So if the government said basically you guys all need to get out and spend some more money, otherwise it's going to time, then people would just go to the bank and draw their money out in cash and stick it under the bed.
Only but not if cash doesn't exist. So cash is also becoming less and less. Yeah. And of course, there are costs for merchants to hold cash. Like, forget the pandemic and people don't maybe want to handle cash as much anymore because other people have held it. But there are costs, there are security issues with running cash in a business. So digital payments, fantastic. I mean, you can see this is the way forward. I don't think physical cash is. But if you didn't have access to cash, or cash was very limited, like maybe you could only take out, £50 in a day or something, then you really would be at the mercy of whoever's at the top of that digital chain. And
like what happened to Greece.
I'm not talking about fraud or money laundering or anything like that. Those are crimes. What it could be used for is, that's really a political motivation to get the economy kickstarted by maybe having people's money expire in their account if they don't spend it in the next 90 days. That's more of a political thing.
Moving away from governments for a bit, I wanted to talk about the role retail banks have in all of this and having access. I know some of the fintech companies offer like crypto wallets, and where do you think retail banks can be very slow to? Is there a future where they're going to offer that mythical digital wallet that will accept?
Well, you'll have read in the Banker probably that as of a couple of days ago, the big US banks have all agreed to have another go at making a wallet. JP Morgan and all the other guys, and they've got someone who knows what he's doing this time. They've got James Anderson, in charge of it. So you'd have to say they're giving it a good go. So the banks are already. I think one observation I would make about that is, and you've also you've got the European wallet thing going on as well, and all this sort of stuff. But one point I would make about wallets is that wallets are really more about identity and credentials than they are about payments. I mean, yes, a wallet has to do payments, but that's kind of not what makes a wallet interesting. What makes a wallet interesting is all the other stuff, whether it's, your driver's license or loyalty cards or all that sort of thing. So, the wallet by itself, is about a lot more than payments. And I mean, they were going on I don't know why I keep calling the European Central Bank they, but I mean, there was something this morning about having like a digital euro app that everybody in Europe would use. And that, I mean, you don't have to have wallets for that sort of thing. I mean, I'm massively a big fan of digital wallets. Digital wallets are going to be huge, but they're about a lot more than payments. I would like to, I'm curious because I can see the questions coming down the right, and I know we're ignoring them all.
Looking, some of them are comments.
I really want to answer the question about mobile remote deposit capture.
I was going to skip that one. Okay, we'll go that in. I'll read it out for the sake of the audience.
What's
Can mobile remote deposit capture be as successful as ACH module, since the chances of fraud have increased in MRDC? Late return is another major challenge.
No, but I mean, what is mobile remote deposit capture? I don't know what it is.
It's you know what? I should have more of a it's something new. I should have more Total Recall about to give you guys a definition of what it is.
No, I like tough questions. I'm going to Google it. I like no, because I want to learn something too we have a smart audience.
Let me see if I can
While you were doing that, and I've just opened up and found the comments part, I can look at it here on the side.
It's on the right-hand side. All that stuff saying get off. I was just joking, Cameron.
Yeah. Well, I'm just glad somebody's here. I mean, apart from you good people, of course, I'm enjoying our conversation. Brendan, you had a question about Tally trustee custodianship. Was Tally proposed to meet the ever-changing consumer needs and motivations? Well, I mean, we're in the private sector. We're delivering what we believe is a safer, more secure form of money that holds its value and protects the consumer. We're nimble. We've got new tech, so we're always looking to, satisfy what our consumers needs and give them a great experience. Ultimately, we just want them to feel safe and happy at the end of the day in using their money in a Tally account. And it can withstand the test of time, I think. Is that what you're saying, to blossom? Look, we can't rush things, but we've been live for 3 years now. And in the last 12 months, we've added 20,000 customers in the UK. We're only available to the UK people in the App Store at the moment. But it's something that we have a long-term game plan on, because competition, again, from the private sector to the state-run monetary system, I believe is very much needed so that we get much better choices and outcomes as consumers.
So by the way, for all of you to know, I knew this was connected more to the US. Mobile remote deposit capture is depositing a check direct into your bank account without going to an ATM or a branch.
What's a check?
I mean, what's cash? You talked about that before.
I got a check from the U.S. government a couple of weeks ago.
Oh.
Deal with that. Anyway.
I've never in my entire life had a checkbook.
Never, really?
Never, ever. And I mean, wow. we gave up checks entirely in Denmark more than 10 years ago. You can't get a check in Denmark.
I mean, I was when was the last time you were in a bank branch?
Oh, actually, I was in a bank branch a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
I was a few days ago because of that check.
But I just checked.
Well, I think currency is going to get rid of that for sure.
But it's in Denmark, it's 3,138 days since I've held or spent any Danish cash.
Wow. So we've got about 5 minutes left.
Oh, sorry,
That's okay. And I wanted to have one final question for each of you, because I think this is kind of interesting. Where we're in a soft recession, not really a true recession, but everyone's talking about cost of living crisis. We're in a different economic environment than we were a few years ago with the end of hopefully the end of the pandemic. How do various changes in economics, in the economic climate impact, what people are looking for in alternative currency usage. Sometimes you see in late night TV ads to put all your money into gold, and when people being tricked into current crypto Ponzi schemes. How in good times will we just be fine with fiat currency? Is it bad times that make us look outside the system? So we're going to give each of you kind of a final statement on that. How do you think the current economic environment kind of impacts what we're looking for from the future of money? So Christian, why don't I start with you?
Well, I think an economic downturn, of course, is a time to reflect and evaluate on what we do. And taking my example from earlier about actually having some kilowatts in your pension savings, that would have saved quite a lot of pensioners from the rising energy costs these days. So the idea that I mean, you invest your money with two purposes. One is to, of course, the speculative side of it. You hope that it increases in value, but there's also a defensive side of it, that inflation doesn't take away the value of your investment. And by spreading out your investments, not only in different stocks and different bonds, but also in entirely different asset classes, and maybe even asset classes where it's the underlying asset itself that you want to redeem at a later stage, for instance, the energy. I think that is something that we will see materialize, and the demand naturally as a result of this economic climate should increase for those kind of services.
So Cameron, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the economic and also the cultural backdrop is changing a bit now. Again, with the advent of CBDCs, people are sort of asking not just about the value and the control the bank has over your access to your money, but if it was directly held by government, and if it was used to maybe further political agendas rather than just stopping a fraud or something, which we should all be supportive of, stopping fraud and money laundering and whatnot. But it's the consumer really that moves along. They start talking about different things, and again, it's really up to the product innovators or the product designers to be looking at those trends and looking at trying to provide what the consumer is after. So I think it's very much led by that, rather than designing things that we think are pretty cool and quicker. It's a thing in fintech. There's a lot of things that get developed that are a solution looking for a problem, and I think you always want to come back to who's this benefiting, how does it work for them, is it really what they want, and to be led by that. And I think the future of money, the future of payments should still be heavily led by that.
Okay, Dave, what do you think? How's the current economic climate influenced this?
I mean, there's weather and climate, right? So I think there's a certain, long-term inevitability about the transition. Mervyn King wrote in his book, gone blank on the name for a second. In Mervyn King's book, he said, there didn't used to be central banks, and there won't be in the future. These are institutional arrangements. So I think there is a kind of inevitability. We're still living with, if you want to characterize things this way, we're still living with the sort of money of the Industrial Revolution. This is, central banks. They're a post-medieval settlement between sort of the merchant and the kings, so to speak. So there's a long-term inevitable history. Now, what is that going to be? I can certainly imagine worse bets than DeFi and tokenization. I mean, they seem to me to be reasonable sort of post-industrial solutions to the general problem of the transfer of value, wealth, managing regulations, all these kind of things. They seem to be a way forward. So personally, I feel there's kind of an inevitability. It doesn't really matter what consumers want from this sort of thing. It's that kind of Steve Jobs sort of thing. Consumers weren't asking for iPhone.
Faster cash. We just want faster cash.
What they want is kind of easier, simpler life. And remember that life in the not too distant future. We're still thinking about people using wallets and making these choices. That's not for much longer. For most people, most of the time, it's going to be bots dealing with this stuff. you'll have far more sophisticated financial instruments using far more complex currency arrangements, because it won't be people doing it anymore. So no, I think there's a certain inevitability about it, and I could be argued out of it, but right now it seems to me that the whole kind of Web3 token DeFi thing is a reasonable candidate for that kind of next phase of evolution.
Okay. So robots will not only take our jobs, but they'll take our wallets.
And on that happy note.
So Dave, Cameron, and Christian, thank you so much for this discussion. It's very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liz.
Bye.